discussing our essay, When Popper Meets Musk. We just published a new essay. It's on Substack. The link is in the show notes. The concept of the essay is we combine the works of Karl Popper, Nick Lane, Clayton Christensen, and then we draw the arch all the way to entrepreneurship. The concept of Nick Lane is fundamental here, which is he builds on the work of Darwin when it comes to evolution in biological systems, and he introduces a really important concept of energy harvesting. So the determining factor in evolution is energy harvesting. And the way that works is through trial and error. Lane goes at full length in his book, The Vital Question, where he explains how mitochondrial DNA is created from sex, from the combination of DNA of parents of a species, and that combination of mitochondrial DNA changes or brings in variability in how organisms harvest energy, and that determines evolution. We take that concept to other areas such as science and business, and since the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund, and Orange Capital Partners, our purpose is to invest in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. So we're fundamentally an investment company. So why do we talk about biology? Why do we talk about philosophy of science? Because we find that the concept of evolution applies to all these areas. Evolution doesn't even just stop with living organisms. Everything is life. In fact, everything on Earth evolves around the same concept of trial and error and finding optimal ways to harvest energy. Niches evolve, they're not found, which is another big innovation that we just spoke about yesterday. And I think it explains one of the biggest questions that we had about Peter Thiel, which is part of a principle stack, the book 0 to 1, where he says that, the competition is for losers. And we always thought about what does he exactly mean? Well, the answer is that you don't compete, you evolve new niches. That's how you grow. That's what growth is for a person, for a business, and for an economy. This is not even on podcast. It's January 18th, 2023. This is Krim Telco for the day. The fund is down 3.1%. The market's down 1.3%. For the year, we're up 5.2%. The market's up 2.8%. We're outperforming by 2.4%. We're discussing our just published essay, When Popper Meets Musk. Karl Popper studied philosophy and the science of philosophy, and his main contribution is that science is a provisional field. That means it is not fully complete. There's no ground truth. There is just solving problems and finding better problems after you solve the problems, and then finding solutions to those better problems, and then keep going. And maybe fundamentally, it is some sort of approach towards reality, but it doesn't really matter. What matters for us humans when we do science is to find better solutions for better problems and keep going. So it's a process of trial and error. We take this concept further and we combine it with Nick Lane's The Vital Question that we discussed at length in several podcasts and book discussions. And the Vital Question asks basically what is life and how does it originate and how does it evolve? And the same question there is asked, and the answer is not just evolution in a sort of Darwinian form, but it adds one big crucial factor, and the crucial factor is that Nick Lane introduces energy harvesting, or the way we deal with energy, the way we harvest energy for our purposes. When I say we, I mean as a species, as a living organism on Earth. It's not just us humans, but in general. Actually, Lane doesn't even stop with living organisms. For him, the line between life and non-life is pretty blurred. When a crystal forms, it does the same thing. Like when a eukaryote evolves a new niche. A crystal evolves a new niche. A crystal, a bunch of dirt falling down from a mountain, creating another hill on top of which maybe stuff can grow, and then eventually, we have civilization growing on that little hill. So all these things are just optimizations through trial and error, and the driving force is energy harvesting. We then take that concept to today's world of business and investing. Clayton Christensen, a very important part of our principle stack, his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, talks about the question, how do incumbents let startups create businesses that eventually displace them? How is that possible? Well, it starts with the same thing. The startup evolves a new niche, a niche that the incumbent doesn't even know that they should be taken care of, and then the startup grows and displaces the incumbent. So very similar process. We then also, of course, end up with Elon Musk. That's where the title comes from. Musk is the incarnation, or exemplifies all of this in the business world. He iterates relentlessly. He is also, and the big takeaway for the business world here is that the same way that niches evolve in nature, also businesses evolve. And the key question is, how can they do this? Well, they have to find early customers, and at the same time build a process that can scale and expand that customer base into a large market. That's exactly how Musk works. That's how all these businesses work, in particular the two famous ones, which is SpaceX and Tesla. Now, we're using the concept of the Tiktaalik, which is another podcast and book discussion we had a while ago. This is something that is kind of following us throughout the years here at Orange Capital Partners, which is a beautiful thing when we find a book or a concept that we can use and keep using. That is, what David Deutsch calls knowledge, which is it just re-instantiates itself, and it's really hard to vary. Now, Neil Shubin's book about the Tiktaalik and about the transition from water to land, I think it's a beautiful analogy of how businesses work, how any kind of evolution works. It combines Nick Lane's idea of energy harvesting with Popper's idea of trial and error, and eventually also explains why we believe that Musk is using all these concepts in the right way to build businesses. So what is the Tiktaalik? The Tiktaalik is an archaeological intermediary, which is a word that we borrow from Nick Lane's book. And this archaeological intermediary is going from water to land. And the big question, of course, is how does this happen? How does fish become a land animal? Because the fish doesn't have any technology to survive on land, and land animals have no technology to survive in the water. In other words, what's the chicken and egg? There's a problem here. It's not even a chicken and egg problem. It's just a problem. How does this transition? We can ask the same question in business. How did online retail happen? I mean, from nothing to online retail, how do we get there? And the answer is we get there through this archaeological intermediary, or in the business world, we get there through finding early customers and then building processes around to build up and scale. So let's get back to the Tiktaalik. The Tiktaalik is a archaeological intermediary, which is some sort of fish type, maybe looks a little bit like an amphibian, not a crocodile, but something like a salamander or something along those lines, which lives in water, but in oxygen-poor parts of water, which is in shallow waters. Why does it live there? Because it doesn't want to compete with the sharks and all the other, crazy animals that are populating water. We're about 380 million years now back in that area when that thing emerged from water to land. So it finds a certain niche in water where it can survive in oxygen-armed water. What does that mean? It has gills, and it sucks oxygen out the water, but the water doesn't have that much oxygen. So it also finds ways to harness energy from air, which is the first sort of steps into a respiratory process that we call lungs today. And let's call this thing, maybe to make it easier, lungfish. So it's a fish that has some sort of lung. It's not exactly a lung like we have it today, but it's something along those lines. Now, the thing is this fish is still sort of an intermediary. That means it takes oxygen from water, but it's also able to take oxygen from air. Another thing it has something which could be used as limbs, and also something which could be used to swim. So it has these both things. It's like Nick Lane says, it's archaeological intermediary. And now the fundamental thing is that it starts harvesting energy from air, and then keeps evolving that niche, which is that area between land and water, by, for example, finding ways to eat certain plants or insects which live on land, and then metabolizes them. So again, harnesses energy from what's out there and starts getting better and better at it, and starts also diverging from the old competition, which is the water-based animals. Now, all of a sudden, when it starts eating insects and when it starts eating plants, it is already quite further down the road from, let's say, a shark. And if a shark now wanted to compete with this thing, it wouldn't have any chance, because through iteration or building an innovation stack. Now, this is Jim McKelvey, also part of our innovation stack that we introduced in the essay. Now, this Tiktaalik, this lungfish, has already built an innovation stack, solved a couple of problems, and is able to be much, much better at, let's say, living, I don't know, 100 meters away from the beach. The shark might now think, well, listen, this is a good idea. I want to do this also. This Tiktaalik actually has a good idea, but now this thing is way ahead of me, and there's no way I can compete with that thing. So the Tiktaalik, keeps growing and growing, and then slowly but surely we create what we call civilization today. In other words, living on land, which started with the Tiktaalik, ended up being what really dominates the world, because at some point then the human came from there, and then the human figured out the brain and how to harvest energy for the brain and computation and all of those things. And here we are today. So this is a beautiful example of a niche which evolves and grows into a global market, which we call land-based animals, of which we are also part of. So I'm using this as a beautiful analogy to combine Nick Lane's ideas with Popper and Christensen and Thiel and Musk and McKelvey. So there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of books, a lot of thinking that are combined in this essay. And we believe this is one of the most important essays that we ever wrote, if not the most important one, as it pertains to our business. A couple of things that come out of this essay. One is, again, you evolve niches, you don't find them. Creativity is nothing but accelerated evolution. So there's a scene in this essay where we talk about, let's say, think about computation, which is accelerated iteration. So computation helps us accelerate iteration, which is another word for saying computation helps us to be just creative but faster. Creativity is nothing but iteration. That's what creativity is. We create something out of nothing through iteration. We build on old things, but we create new things. And computation helps us to accelerate what evolution would do also. Anything that's possible can happen. We've said that many times. This is, David Deutsch. This is the multiverse. Anything that's possible can happen. Maybe not in our multiverse, but it may happen somewhere else. But the fundamental key is here, is that through iteration and computation, we can accelerate what evolution would do anyway. So back to the essay. In this essay, we talk about this scene where we have three paths to get to, let's say, abundant energy. And we spoke about this in our old essay, in an essay before that was published, which is fusion is illusion, abundant energy is not. So in that essay, we kind of spoke about how we should introduce Moore's law into energy to get to abundant energy and get rid of the sort of energy industrial complex that is actually hindering progress in energy. Back to this essay, When Popper Meets Musk. What we're saying here is that we could have three processes that get us to abundant energy. Let's say, solar cells with 99.9999% efficiency, batteries at low cost, high performance, and absolutely no lost cables that can, transmit energy from the Sahara or wherever, or the Arizona desert to New York City, and so on and so forth. So how do we get there? Well, there's three ways we can get there. One is we can just let evolution take its path. So let's say humans do nothing. Humans don't even tinker. There's no creativity, nothing. There's simply just evolution, mutation, new life forms, all that stuff. Well, eventually something will happen. The same way we happened throughout evolution, I think it will happen. It just takes a long time. The second path would be that we just tinker. So we don't have computation. We don't have any of the IT technology that we have, but we tinker. We put a little bit of iron here, a little bit of lithium there, a little bit of copper here, and so on and so forth. At some point, we'll get the solution. But the third path, which is the path where we introduce creativity, is the one where we can then, let's say, use quantum computers and reinforcement learning, artificial intelligence, which is something that DeepMind is doing to try to solve physical problems. Solving physical problems through iteration and trial and error is very, very expensive, because you build a battery, you have to build it, you destroy it, build it again. Musk is doing this in Boca Chica with rockets. It's just very expensive. Imagine if we could simulate stuff in in digital space and then just build the solution once we have it in physical space. So this could happen much, much faster if we used computation, which is accelerated iteration, which is another word for accelerated creativity or accelerated evolution. This is an example of why we have this enormous growth in innovation, and why we believe that we're at the cusp of another big leap of growth as a species, because we have two big tools, quantum computing and AI, in particular reinforcement learning and other tools that can help us build better solutions also in physical space and accelerate evolution along those lines. So I want to now come to the meat of the essay and the fundamental conclusion, the takeaway that is really important for investors, and that's the following: that a successful venture, a successful disruptor, or a successful startup that wants to evolve into a large market has to start with an early customer. That's very important, which is the equivalent of, if you think of the tiktaalik, the fish has to find a way to early on absorb oxygen, and maybe for a while even absorb it from water and air at the same time. And then, but at the same time, put processes in place that can start harnessing. Now I'm back to the startup world. Put processes in place that can start harnessing larger markets. So the oxygen of the startup is the early customer. We also use the concept of science and Popper's idea of validation. Validation is the oxygen of science. Validation is key. Validation in business is the customer. You need this validation. Lots of businesses, they start and they're looking for a binary solution. So we do 5 years of research, solid state batteries. It's gonna take us 10 years, but then one day we're gonna have the solution. Fusion, energy fusion, same thing. Why are we against these big picture, large investment, multi-billion-dollar investment type stuff? It's because there is no oxygen. The analogy in biology would have been that if the shark wants to go and become a human on land, the shark, which is the king of the water, 380 million years ago, let's say there's one of the sharks says, hey, we could do this thing that, we can call ourselves humans and become human. Let's do some research. Let's figure out how we can become humans. It doesn't work like that. It takes lots and lots of iteration, and it takes small steps, validation, small steps, trial and error, because you don't know what the path of evolution will be. We don't have that kind of knowledge. We're not wired to know in advance what's going to happen. It's just not how we operate. That's not how nature operates. That's not how evolution works, at least in our universe. However, what works is if we find niches, and I shouldn't use the word find, in order to evolve a new niche, we have to find a place where we can use our current assets and our current knowledge and then evolve with that niche. And the evolution is reciprocal. So let's, now in the business world, if I bring an electric Tesla Roadster to market, which is my first validation, my first little bit of oxygen that I get, I put laptop batteries into a big battery, create a car, call it a Roadster, sell it to people for real money, real customers, and then I get feedback. The feedback is, I like it, I want this, I don't want that, all that stuff. The key is though, now I start evolving. There's a couple of things. One was I remember 20 years ago or 15 when this thing came out, the torque, the lack of noise, the speed, all that, the cool factor, all of these things were feedback that was good. We could start evolving and creating slowly through trial and error a car which is, today we call it the Model Y, which is a mass market car, the best selling car in the world, most likely soon. And then we go from there. And some of the characteristics of that car, the safety, the lack of noise, the torque, the speed, the elegance, those things are becoming now what a car looks like. So that's why also competition can compete and so on and so forth. So again, validation is the oxygen of business. Validation is the oxygen of science. Validation is the oxygen of anything that evolves. Even the crystal that forms, it has to validate itself. by finding a lower energy state, or by harnessing the environment in a way that it creates a lower energy state. So to summarize, in our discussion of our just published essay, When Popper Meets Musk, we combine the works of Karl Popper and Lane, Clayton Christensen, with today's business world, and particularly Musk, who exemplifies all of this. And what's interesting is that even though all these thinkers start from a different vantage point, they all converge to the same solution. We call it, all the little creeks end up in the same big river, the river we call evolution. And the evolution is the relentless process of trial and error correction, with a determining factor, which is how to harness energy most optimally given the environment that I'm exposed to. And again, the environment changes with the disruptor, with the new thing. So it's a reciprocal process. You know, Nick Lane talks about this also in his book, when plants figured out how to take CO2 and exert oxygen, they oxygenized the planet, and that became the sort of the starting point where then the lungfish could come and use oxygen and find ways to extract oxygen from air, which was the base for what we call today's civilization on Earth, land-based civilization. And for business, again, the fundamental concept for business, like if you want to invest money into something which potentially could grow fast and big, you want to look at validation, early customers, and at the same time, processes in place to continue evolving and building larger markets. Thank you.